Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Opinion Machine, the show where we talk about all things gaming. My name is Killjoy, and today I want to give you my thoughts on Xenoblade Chronicles 3, as I have recently finished the game, and this is going to go without saying, there will be spoilers in this video. If you do not want to be spoiled on anything about this game that I'm going to talk about, then please stop watching the video now and then come back when you finish the game, or if you're okay with being spoiled, basically. But yeah, I've just finished playing the game. I've put in about 100 hours. I may continue to play more of it, but in terms of finishing the story, that's where I'm at. And so I want to talk about that experience. Now, just to give you a quick backstory, I'd never played the original Xenoblade Chronicles until Definitive Edition came out. I then played that, loved that, played 2, loved that, and then this came out. And to be perfectly honest, I love this game as well. And I want to talk about all the elements of it that are in this game that I really enjoyed. So let's start with the story, right? So this is going straight into spoilers, right? The story of this game is quite dark in the sense that it's basically about child soldiers. This whole premise is that you have these two warring nations of these young child soldiers, probably from the age of sort of like 10 to about the age of 20, or like, yeah, something along those lines. They die, and then more soldiers are born from the ones that die. And the whole premise is about these two warring nations, and locked in this endless battle, basically, of trying to survive, essentially. And the 6 characters that you have, or it's more than that really, but the 6 characters that you start with, that you play with, get intertwined, and you start to like learn about both sides of both Keves and Agnes and what's going on. And then as the game goes on, you start to realize actually these sides are both being played by a higher power, and then by the time at the end of the game you realize there's a reason why these sides are fighting to feed the world, to keep the world going in its current state. And the story itself is actually really, really good. It's very different to the other two. Xenoblade 1 is pretty much a revenge story. Shulkin goes off and Ryan goes with him to avenge the death of their friend. And then 2 is very much a case of, it's a kind of big escort mission you're trying to take. Rex is trying to take Pyra to Elysium. So obviously those are the very basic outlines of those stories, but even in this doesn't pull any punches. Straight away you're in the tutorial, chucked into a battle right off the get-go in the middle of a war zone, and you basically obliterate a colony straight away. And it's like, oh, this game is not. It becomes more hopeful. A lot of the other people you meet and things that happen in the game become more hopeful, but the general story and what's going on, it is dark. It's so much darker than the other 2 games, and that's it was a big risk, really, but it's one that I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the fact that you have these all these kids know is that they're literally, like they keep saying in the game, they live to fight. They're born to fight for their nations, and then go from there, really. And as the story goes on, you realize this is a process that keeps happening over and over and over again. Time is basically frozen where these 2 worlds have collided, and you realize that actually we need to stop this from happening, so that time will unfreeze and things will go back to the way they should be, with the 2 planets or worlds not becoming one. And as the game goes on, the stakes get bigger and bigger, and you realize you learn more and see what's going on. And this game kind of connects Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2 together to this game. So this game exists because of what's going on with those games. So, again, if you've not played the first 2, but basically what happens in the first game is you have, I think it's Klaus, I can't remember the name of the scientist, smashes this thing to create a new universe. What he actually does is split the universe in 2, and that's Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and Xenoblade Chronicles 2. And this game is about those worlds colliding, basically, and being kept to a standstill. So that's basically what's going on there. But overall, the story is fun, it's interesting, it's intriguing. There's a ton of really good side stories, there's a ton of really good side characters. The main characters get a lot of stuff happen to them and what they go through. And so that side of it's really good, and that's a good segue into the characters themselves. I won't go through every single character, but let's talk about the main 6 and a couple of standouts for me personally. So on the Keves side, you start with Lance, Uni, and Noah. Noah is very much a typical hero in a game. He's very much like respectful and willing to learn and understand people and help people out. Lance is very much like Ryan. He's kind of like the friend, but also the bit of a meathead. And I gotta be honest, Lance is probably my favorite character. I think he has some fantastic story moments. There's a lot going on in his backstory that you really see come to light quite early on. And he's just like a really interesting character. A lot of people think that he's just like a meathead type character, but he's more there than you think. And his whole like quests and stuff around him are really interesting. And then you have Uni, who is like the sassy female of the group, who is very much just she's very hot-headed herself, like Lance, and clashes with a lot of characters. But she's also, you know, she's a good healer. That's her whole thing. Very caring, like really cool character like that. But definitely out of the three girls of the team, she's like the hothead and the antagonistic of the three of them. On the other side of that, you have Agnes, and you have Mio, you have Tyon, and you have Senna. Mio is kind of like the equivalent to Noah. She's a bit different. She's kind of running out of time in this game, where after 10 terms, 10 years, you go back to be going to Life Force, and she's running out of time, and that's how the game kind of starts. Like when you really get to know her, that she's kind of worried about running out of time. And she has some really good character moments as well in the story, which is really cool to see. Tyon is one of my favorite characters because he is very much the brains, the strategist. But when you see more again of his backstory to how he is now and how he's become, you realise it's a little bit tragic. You realise that he, you know, something happened to him. He loses this close friend of his, and you know, he's probably the most standoffish at first, or at least one of them, him and Lance. And by the end of the game, he's like, you know, he's one of the team. Like, it's very much like he gets over a lot of his hurdles and hatred for Keves and stuff, and he's teamed up with Uni, and I think that combination of two works really well. And then you have Senna, who is basically the I'm really strong and I'm there for my friends, but I'm really like unsure of myself kind of character. But she's fun. She's kind of the one character that, it's not that she doesn't get a lot of good moments, she just feels a little bit less love given to her, unlike the other characters. What's really interesting is that most of the people that are voice acted in this game, so like Noah, Mio, Lance, pretty much all of them are all kind of English. Uni especially is very English. She's very like, alright, like very London. Senna is weirdly enough American. Like the one person on your team that's American. You do meet other people with different voice actors and stuff, but it's just interesting that they did that. And so the main core cast are all fantastic, really, throughout the entire game. They have incredible moments. They interlink with each other in this, and then those moments just sort of shine through at certain parts of the story. There's really high emotions, there's really low emotions. There's some amazing stuff with Noah and Mio. I think Lance has some fantastic moments. So does Tyon. I do think Senna's probably the weakest of the bunch, but it doesn't make she's an enjoyable character. She's very optimistic about everything. She's like, yeah, let's go, let's do all this stuff, and which is kind of needed. And I like it. I like what they've done with the characters. Also, say what you want about the voice acting, I really enjoy it. Like, I enjoy the English voice acting. I know some people say it's a bit either a bit cheesy or stilted, but a lot of it's usually just voice delivery. But I enjoy what was there, and I think the voice actors did a fantastic job. Apart from the main characters, you also have hero characters that you can get, and they vary and they give different classes and stuff. I'm not going to name all of them, but there's some really good standouts for me. There's one called Xeon, who is basically a defender class, and his whole story of his colony, like how you meet him, how standoffish he is at first, him coming around to you guys, and then what he wants to do for the colony and stuff. And he's just, I love the voice actor. Like, I wish I knew the name of the voice actor. He does a really calm, soothing sort of sounding, like gravelly voice for this guy. And Xeon's just like straight up like just a good guy in this game. He wants to help people. He wants to see that colony succeed. He wants to make relations with other colonies, and he goes off on this whole thing about potatoes, like trying to sustain the colony with food. And it's all about potatoes and growing potatoes, which might not sound that interesting, but the way that it's written and the way that his character changes and like the relations around him, awesome. Really, probably one of my favourite side heroes. On top of that, there's actually a character in the game called, I think it's Captain Triton, who is actually a Mobius person, who's the main villain of the game, or the villains of the game. But he ends up joining your team, and he is basically a pirate. He is voiced like a pirate. The voice actor's like bizarre as hell, like Somerset pirate. And I really like him. The bits that I have done with him so far as a character, he stands out because he is different. He's like, let's have a bit of fun, a bit of a challenge. He also has one of the most interesting classes in the game, being Soul Hacker, which essentially allows you to defeat unique enemies and take their abilities and stuff, and that was really, really cool. But Xeon Triton, probably some of my favourites. There's other characters there. There's like Ashira, who's this crazy, lives to fight commander who's just looking like running into battle all the time, and absolute nutski. Like, has a really cool dual blade thing. Like, she's a lot of fun. I'm trying to think who else really stood out to me. There's quite so many of them. Ethel's really cool. She's like a dual blader and stuff like that. So there's a ton of them. I could be here. Oh, and Gray. Gray's one of my favourites. He is basically a guy who's got double pistols. He absolutely hates everybody, but he respects you, and his whole story is amazing. Every time you get to have conversations with him, he just doesn't want to talk. He wants to get to the details, gets on with the job, and puts up with you. And he is one of the better ones as well. There are a lot of heroes in this game, and you do eventually unlock Melia and Nia, because they are in this game, and their whole side story stuff are fantastic as well. They really do give you a lot more insight to the game, and they're a lot of fun. So that the character side of it, the side stories, all of that really enhance this game. So that's awesome. Let's come on to the sort of the combat and the gameplay. So if you've played Xenoblade, any of the Xenoblade games before, you kind of have an idea of how the combat works. In this, they've tried to combine Xenoblade 1 and 2. So you have like the moves from Xenoblade 1 that are on a timer and they just cool down automatically. And then you have the Xenoblade Chronicles 2 method, which is where you have every time you do an auto attack, that recharges an ability. What's cool about this is basically when you start with a Keves person, they have the timer, and as you switch classes for each character and level them up, you can then have 6 abilities, and 3 of those abilities will be your timers, 3 of those abilities will be your refills via doing the auto attack. And the game has some pretty in-depth stuff with combat, but luckily it does a fantastic job of teaching you bit by bit like how things work, how to do this, how to do fusion attacks, how to do chain attacks. Overall, the combat, I think, I haven't played it in a while. I think Xenoblade Chronicles 1 is my favourite combat. I don't think it's nearly as complex as 2 and as 3. 3 isn't actually that complicated, but there is obviously 7 people with a hero in combat versus whatever the enemy is. So there is a lot going on. But essentially, you have your skills. You can combine the skills if you have all 6 slots filled, and that allows you to do like stronger attacks. You can later on do chain attacks, which is like where the game stops and it becomes a turn-based game where you're wailing on the enemy, and that has its own benefits and bonuses. And then lastly, you can interlink later on, which gives you an entire new moveset and very, very powerful tools and powerful attacks. And so there's a lot going on. But honestly, I think combat is handled very, very well in this game. Probably better than Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which was a little bit messy. As much as I enjoyed it, it was a bit bloody nutso. So there is that. Apart from the combat, which, like I said, is fun and generally just good, the rest of the gameplay is your standard Xenoblade affair. You running around big worlds, looking for secrets, finding unique monsters, doing side quests. The world itself is pretty. You've got like a desert, so you can run through. You've got big snowy areas. You've got mountainous areas, grassy plains. It doesn't quite have that same Gower Plains moment early on like the first one does, but it does have a time that does kind of kick in later on in the game. You have like the whole city. You have the sword from the first game that you were on. Honestly, the gameplay is really, really good. The game is really refined. The game is very streamlined for people trying to get into it. It's not perfect. I'll be honest with you now, it's not perfect. There are a lot of quests, side quests, a lot more than I was expecting, that collect a bunch of items. Which, after you've done it a few times, if you're doing lots of side quests back to back, it can get old very quickly. But a lot of the time you naturally come across those items and you can just go back to them at a later date and hand them all in at once. On top of that, you also have the quests that go like, go here, then go here, now come back here. And that can, again, feel like it can happen a little bit too often. Just because, you know, it does take a little bit of load time to go from a new area to new area, and these areas are massive. Like, I'm surprised the Switch can just have it. I don't know what wizardry they're using under that hood, but absolutely crazy. But in terms of just like an RPG, you've got everything you want. You've got a decent amount of crafting, more of a simplified version with the gems, but it works really well. You just collect the right materials, you can upgrade your gems. You've got your accessory slots. You've got a ton of skills for each of the characters. You've got the class changing. You've got you know, like the exploration side of things is really cool, like going around the world. You've got this amazing quest tracker thing that you can turn on and off at any point. I had it on most of the time, and it just kind of points you in the right direction. So if you ever get lost, especially looking at the map, sometimes it can get a bit confusing. But generally speaking, having that on will kind of just take you where you need to go. You don't have to use it, completely optional. I just liked having it, so a lot of the time when I was looking at the map and there was some elevation issues, I could just be like, oh, I need to climb the wall there, that's fine, I can get up there now, that's not a problem. So there's a lot going on with this game, but it's also streamlined in the correct places for people that are new to it. But it also doesn't take, this game isn't easy. It's not taking away the elements of the old games that made them fun. It's just those little things, the little niggles that maybe the old games had, you know, having the quest tracker, being able to track the quests quite easily, just many little small things that make the experience more enjoyable. Even the Collectopedia cards, you have these cards that people want items that will give you items in return, will give you increase your, not infamy, but essentially increase your standing with those colonies. You can use the Collectopedia cards, you can go out and collect the stuff, and you can just send it wherever. You don't have to go back to that person and say, hey, I've got these 5 items you were looking for. You can do it at any point in your game, so that's a bit more streamlined. They've made a lot of good changes, and a lot of changes that you would like to see in an RPG of this size to make sure that the game doesn't feel like it's wasting your time. For example, there is one quest where you need it to rain. Now, you can wait naturally and let the game rain on its own, or for a fee, you can speak to a Noppon and basically get it to rain. Don't ask me how he does it, but he does do it. And the good thing about that is you get so much money in this game that you at that point, you'll probably be fine, because you find most of your best items in the world. So you never really have to buy much, which maybe that's a problem with the game, but it's nice to be able to have money on hand. I got to a point very late in the game where I had to help rebuild an area into a colony, and it required a lot of money, and luckily I had saved up so much money that I was like, oh cool, I can do this all in one go. You know, I didn't have to go off and look for it, and it meant that like all my time, the other currencies which are Noppon coins were being used for the things I wanted it to. I was finding all the good items in the wild, taking my time exploring. And so I had a really good experience playing this game. Gameplay wise, I think the gameplay is probably at its best. I would need to go back and play the first one because I can't remember exactly what it was like, but I mean, Definitive Edition did do a lot of quality of life improvements, which I think have carried over into this game. So, you know, like, I'm very pleased. I think the one thing I would have liked to have seen is the missions that require you to collect multiple items. It would have been nice to know like a bit more of a pinpoint on which, like, there's one area that's just loads of islands and a shed load of water. It would have been nice to be like, this is the island you need to go to. It tells you the area, but it doesn't tell you the island, and some of those areas are massive. So it does take time to like go and find that stuff. But that's a very small niggle in essentially what is a very well-rounded out game, honestly. And lastly, let's just talk a little bit about the world. The world itself is really nice to walk around in. There's a ton of places to explore, a ton of like secrets. There are containers everywhere. There are side quests that you can find from just walking around. Tons of unique monsters. I haven't fought it yet, but I opened up a puzzle. There's a massive dragon inside, level 105, and I'm like, oh, I don't think I'm going to be fighting that yet. And it turns out there's like a lot of unique monsters, and they are fun. Like, that's some of the best combat it's ever going to get. Combined with the places you go in the world. Like I said, there's a big desert, and then there's caves in the desert, and there's like an oasis there, and then you've got the first area which is mostly grasslands, and when the game starts off, you think you've uncovered most of the areas a lot of the time, and then you realise, you go, oh wait, no, there's a lot more to this area, and these maps are massive. You know, once you hit sort of level 90, you can pretty much go. I mean, I'm level 84, I think, 3 or 4 at this point, I think, and I can go pretty much wherever I want. But yeah, it gets crazy, and that's kind of the fun thing about this game, is you always get to come back and once you've leveled up and find more areas, go rooting in places that you couldn't before, because generally speaking, as soon as you hit like you're outside of the level range of a certain monster, it won't attack you, so now you can get into areas much easier. There's plenty of monsters to fight. Like the game's just got like, I mean, the pacing can be a bit squiffy, but generally speaking, being able to explore at my own pace, come back to areas when I felt, you know, I'd leveled up maybe 10 levels, I'm like, alright, I'm ready to take on this area now. Like, it's really satisfying, and I think the world being as interesting as it is, the places you go, like a big city, the scaling the sword, going to the different castles and seeing what they're like in the game. A big area that's full of water and you're using a boat. Like, the game just does a lot of correct steps to make this game constantly engaging and fun. At this point, after the main story, like, there are some things to do, but, you know, I think I've hit a natural progression personally, where I'm like, okay, apart from the unique monsters and trying to get to like a high enough level to do some of them, I think I've kind of run my course for the game, and that's okay, you know. But all in all, this game has been an absolute blast. This has become one of my favourite. This trilogy as a whole is like probably my favourite trilogy of RPGs. I'm not including X in that because I haven't finished it, and 2, it's a side story or a spin-off game of the originals. But everything I've talked about in this video, like, I am super happy with the game. Like I said, minor niggles with certain things, some of the way the quests are handled. You know, the game has some stiffness to it with some of the character models and interactions, but the actual cutscenes are good. It's mostly the in-game stuff that looks a little bit old, maybe showing its age, but generally speaking, it's an incredibly good story, amazingly fun characters, really good combat, really good gameplay outside of the combat, and really interesting world to explore. So all in all, the package itself is fantastic, and I'm really glad that I got to play this. I mean, there's parts of this game that made me well up. The ending is like just seeing, after all that hard work, you know, the world's returning to how they should be. Getting a glimpse of what life was like after Xenoblade Chronicles 2, after Xenoblade Chronicles 1, getting to spend time with Melia and Nia was really, really cool again. And I think this game hits all the right beats. If you're a fan of the series, you're going to be a fan of this game. And if you didn't like Xenoblade Chronicles 2 that much, I think you're going to enjoy this game significantly more, because this game kind of it focuses on, there's a little bit of that anime style that I can understand some people don't like in the second one. In this, that's really non-existent, and maybe apart from one character. Other than that, the game itself is just a blast to play, and it's a really solid RPG. So if you're thinking about picking up this game, I recommend it 100%. This is easily, for me, this is a 10 out of 10. This is pretty much like the first game, which was also a 10 out of 10 for me. Like, these games, they're not perfect. I'm not saying the games are perfect, but the RPG experience that I get from these games is solid, and I love them, and I think they're fantastic. So yeah, there you go. There's my thoughts on Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you like the video, hit like. If you want to see more content like this, then hit subscribe. Links for Facebook and Twitter will be down below in the description as always. And until next video, I will see you then.